Welcome back, everybody, to Uncensored CMO. Now, one of my very favourite campaigns of all time is Should Have Gone to Specsavers. Talk about an idea that's transformed a business. So I wanted to talk to the CMO, Peter Wright, and the MD of their in-house creative, Nicola Wardell, about how they did it. There are so many campaigns that have cut through and made a real difference to the business. I want to understand how they do it, how successful it's been, and what we can learn from those campaigns. But also, if you want to watch the ads and not just hear us talk about them, then go to my YouTube channel at Uncensored CMO and check it out for yourself. Without further ado, let's get into it. So Peter and Nicola, welcome to Uncensored CMO.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, John. And this must feel a lovely break in between LA and San Francisco and Sydney and Melbourne. So
well, I was going
to
thank you. I was going to do a tour T-shirt, go LA, San Francisco, St. Peter's Port, and then Melbourne, Sydney.
Precisely.
Exactly. But it's lovely to be here. I guess I must start with the question, how did the two of you end up on a small island doing the jobs you do? I mean, maybe Peter, start with you, because I know you've done some big corporate jobs in the past. What got you here?
What got me
here?
Yes. It's a very good question, isn't it? No, I think I was like most people. Whenever you're looking for a new job, you're kind of looking for, well, what are the things that are important to you? And for me, Specsavers got strong brands, so that as a marketeer would always attract you. It's in a meaningful business. And I think, you get on a bit in life and you want to make sure that what you're doing is adding some value. For me, the other important thing about anywhere I went to was the culture. And I really wanted to go into a place with a really strong culture, supportive culture, that was then prepared to allow you to do what you needed to do. So a series of those things all fell into place. And then sort of like you chat to your wife and she's like, you up for Guernsey? And it happens that my wife's from the Isle of Man, so she's used to sort of
island life.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And
I can confirm it's a beautiful island, and the
island.
Food is amazing as well. So you're not short of places to go and eat.
There's a lot to love.
There is, isn't there?
Yeah.
So Nicola, tell me, so you've been working in agencies, holding companies, like London, of course, know.
So I was in London agencies for 25 years and was looking for an opportunity. I think the part of my job I'd always loved was the connection with clients. And I was of the firm belief that you get better work, the better the relationship with the clients. So in-housing always fascinated me, but there weren't many examples of in-housing that were doing amazing work. So when this job description landed in my inbox, I was really excited, and then saw in tiny print, based in Guernsey, and thought, why not? Let's go and have an adventure. So we did, and we're here and loving it.
Yeah, well, we're going to come on and talk about in-housing because, of course, Should Have Gone to Specsavers, the campaigns you've done, are some of the most iconic, successful, talked about campaigns on the planet, and all come from here, right? All born and raised in
all
Guernsey,
made on the island,
which is impressive.
Yeah.
So maybe for people listening and watching, let's start with the story of how Specsavers came into being, because it's 40 years old, I believe, on Valentine's Day.
Yep.
So tell me about how. This
is Doug and Mary's story. So Doug and Mary, the founders of the business, they met as optometrists in Cardiff University. They started their own business together in Bristol. Actually, they built it up, and I think they had about 20-ish stores, and then sold it. And then they moved to the island where Mary's mother was living, sort of like basically decide, what are we going to do with the rest of our lives? What does it look like? And I think they tried a few different things. And it was during the early 80s when the Thatcher government deregulated a lot of professional services, which allowed for advertising. And Doug saw the immediate possibility with that and started off the business. So on Mary's birthday, which is February 14th, 40 years ago, they opened their first store on the island. And then it kind of grew from that. And I don't think they ever thought it was going to be the size it is today. They thought it might get to 20, 30, maybe up to 100 stores. And we're going to open our 1,000th store in the UK later on this year. We've got 2,500 around the world. We're in 11, 12 countries. It's like, I don't think they'd ever imagined it would grow to that size, but that's their story.
And as a business, I think you employ almost the equivalent of the population of Guernsey, don't you?
We're the biggest private employer
it's a good
on the
percentage.
Island. So it is a large, but I mean, there's a lot of people based in the UK and obviously in other parts around the world.
Yeah, it's amazing. So if you can decode, what is it about the brands, the business, about Mary and Doug that has made it such a success today? What are the secrets, would you say?
I think,
I always talk about the democratic nature of the business. So democracy is what drove them. So those guys had a purpose way before anyone was talking about purpose.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't a thing, was it, 40 years ago? But they were really single-minded that they wanted everyone to be able to afford good quality eye care. And they've stuck to that vision for 40 years. And I think that makes a huge difference. So if you go into our stores, there's a pair of glasses there for £19 if that's all you have. But also there's more stylish ranges. There's lots of things for everyone in our stores. And they're really passionate about that. And I think to being really single-minded about what this business is about has made the huge difference.
And the nice thing, it kind of this then pervades the culture, because when you've got a purpose, so changing lives through better sight and hearing, you're kind of going, everyone knows that's why you're here. You come to work because you're making a difference. Sometimes you are helping save someone from a brain tumour you've discovered behind the eyeball. Other times it's just finding the right solution to allow them to see and enjoy life. If you ever talk to the guys who work in audiology, and if you ever know anyone who's partially deaf, I mean, it takes them years before they admit to the fact that they're going deaf. But as soon as they get that correction, they can rejoin their families. They interact again. It makes such a difference to their lives. And that's really nice, because we know that's what we're doing.
And everyone who works is aware of that. It's like there's something bigger than us. We all know why we come to work. It's not necessarily about making amazing adverts. That's brilliant that we do. But actually, it's the difference we're making to people's lives. And that sounds very sort of modern age purpose, but it's not. It's just what the business is about.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I mean, go back to the 80s, like when we were all at school, and it was like either it was like NHS glasses, which was a stigma, right? I mean, you know, all the kids got picked on when they had the glasses. Yeah. All glasses were something out of reach, hundreds of pounds, and it was something very sort of, you know, very, very high end.
I mean, if you think about it at the time, it was quite a sort of visionary sort of thought that they had. I don't think they realised they were being visionary. It just seemed like the sensible thing to do. It was just who they were. And, you know, they both come from humble backgrounds. I mean, you've met Mary today. I mean, she's lovely. And this is just who they are.
The thing that struck me, I mean, it's so down to earth, isn't she? You know, so down. And the fact that she was chatting about a conversation at a bus stop about glasses, and the fact that she was giggling about, well, that's consumer research there. You know, I was getting an honest, unvarnished, you know, response to our latest thing.
And she does keep saying that a lot, actually. Some of the guys who work in Insights get a bit frustrated after a while. You got to go, there is a bit more to it than that. But she's right. And I think any marketeer should always spend some time talking to their customers. I mean, there's no substitute for it. You know, it's not a representative sample, but it's real. It's somebody's story. And I think everybody should do that every once in a while. I mean, I go out, and I now do it around the world, just spending a little bit of time talking to our colleagues in the stores, the partners who run the stores. If I get the chance to talk to customers as well, I'll do so. I'm a bit limited in Northern Europe because of my language skills, but elsewhere you do.
I worked for a Japanese company for a while, actually, and they had this lovely phrase called the gemba, which basically meant where the action happens. So either the shop floor, the factory, the customers that are buying. And they always had this sort of mantra about being in the gemba, because that's where you learn. And if you're in the gemba, then decisions will become very easy because they become very obvious. And in a big organization, we build these layers, don't we, in departments and reports and research, and it kind of separates us, doesn't it? So I love the fact that she's still out there, still getting feedback on.
And it's quite genuine. So it's a bit embarrassing when you go traveling with her, because she will stop and talk to literally anybody.
But does it completely incognito?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll be in the back of a cab with her, and she'll be talking to the cabbie about, oh yeah, is there an optician around here? Just to get the response and then start the conversation.
I love that.
But that constant curiosity is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Constantly asking questions. I guess as marketers, that's our first job, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be asking questions, to be representing the consumer, to be understanding them, and to be, representing them in decision making. Effectively,
it's the most important thing we can do is to understand what's going on in their lives. And of course, we've got different techniques and different ways of which we can do that. But fundamentally, that's our starting point.
Now, you've worked for different organisations, and this is a family-owned business. It's been that for a long time. What's the difference that working in a family-owned organisation makes compared to, say, a corporate organisation or a big kind of network organisation?
I think it's been in it for the long game. So I mentioned this earlier. It's having a bigger why. So we all know there's something bigger than us and bigger than the department we work in, bigger than what we do on a day-to-day. But not having to report quarterly, annually. I mean, obviously we report, but we're reporting to Mary and Doug and to a family that are in it for the long game. And it makes such a difference to how we approach what we do.
That's so liberating, isn't it?
It is. It's when you've worked in a big corporate, and I've been on boards of PLCs and everything, and you find the questions you get asked just feel like they're the wrong questions. You're trying to drive the business forward. It doesn't happen overnight. Many of the decisions, particularly in marketing, are long term. So you've got to allow that. And we're lucky enough. I've worked for a few private companies now where when the owners are involved, they know that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, going back to my Japanese example, actually, they'd often talk about a 25-year plan, which is like, because in most PLCs, it's like, how do we survive the quarter to get, increase earnings per share, reduce costs, improve margin? In a very short term, take a 25-year view. What would you do differently?
Yeah, it suddenly opens up, and then you know the right answer quickly. It's it's not hard to do. It's when you're asked to do something in the short term, you go, well, what are the compromises in order to do it in the short term? And you generally end up regretting it.
Now, we must come and talk about should have gone to Specsavers, because
course.
I think if you were to ask anybody about a famous kind of strapline or a proposition from a brand that has built a business, it feels like that has really been fundamental in building the business. So tell us the origin story. Where did that come from? And was it always destined to be, or how did that come to life?
So, obviously this is way before my time. So I'm 4 years in, 22 years ago. Almost. It started as a line in an ad. So it wasn't born as an idea as we would know it today. It was a line in an ad that obviously stuck. And it took a few iterations of work in order to realise its potential as an idea. What's brilliant about my team is the longevity. So I've got guys here who were involved in those early iterations. And they always say it was a real gradual journey to get to, I think, sheepdog, collie, that's the first execution that really catapulted it into being, wow, this is going to have cultural impact. This is a strong idea.
It's amazing. It's amazing that it's gone for so long as well. I mean, you'd be tempted to imagine that at some point some marketing directors turned up and reviewed it, right? So has it ever been challenged in that time? Have you ever thought about it?
Of course it's going to happen, isn't it? I mean, that's the first thing I did when I came in, and you do that anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm nearly 3 years in. Anyone's going to look at something of that nature and say, right, does that still work? Is it still relevant? And you do sit down and question it. There were some questions in the business when we were, so for example, during COVID, when you couldn't come, so you weren't allowed out of your house, so it doesn't really have relevance anymore. It wasn't running around all of our countries. So they'd all convinced themselves that they needed to do different things, etc. So you get into that sort of piece. But naturally, you sit down, you look at it. Is this still relevant? Does it still work? How does it work? And with that in mind, and I sort of look at these things, tend to be quite rational and just say, yeah, that seems to work. I think that's going to deliver the result for us. Actually, it's really, really powerful. It's like, why would you throw it away? But I think one of the interesting things is, I think this tends to happen a lot, is you start constructing your own rules around how it works. And then it becomes, oh, no, now it doesn't quite work in this way or that way. And I think the one thing probably when I did do that piece of work, so I think you can liberate yourselves on that. Just open it up again. And then suddenly that gives you a new lease of life. And it's a powerful idea that can constantly be reinvented. So, it's brilliant fun to work with.
What is interesting, and back to your earlier point about always talking to customers, we did talk to customers and non-customers about alternatives and the potential of, if should have didn't exist. And the response was just a unanimous, never get rid of that. It's amazing. We knew that ourselves, but obviously our customers telling us was a double whammy.
No, and so you do. And then we checked around the world as well, and you kind of go, it's just as relevant elsewhere.
It's so powerful.
It's like, why wouldn't you? So then the next bit became, to those countries not running it, maybe you want to rethink that one. And so it sort of develops from that, really.
It's one of those rare moments as well where it becomes part of the vernacular as well, that people use it in conversation, even out of context, which is amazing, isn't it?
So when you hear it, so I was on a bus in London the other week, and there were two teenage boys talking about, an inappropriate conversation, but talking about someone else's girlfriend, and literally, these are teenagers, oh, you should have gone to Specsavers. I felt like tapping them on the shoulder, but thought, no, don't do it.
Oh, I wish
don't
you had.
do it,
That'd be
Nick.
funny.
Stop it.
Well, I was looking up just for fun, right? See, what are the longest running straplines that there are? And now, this isn't an official list. Again, this is just what the internet could tell me. So I'm sure I'll get listeners calling in and go, John, you've missed our one, right? So I'm just preparing myself for that. Anyway,
Disclaimers.
Disclaimers. It's the top 5 longest running, consistent straplines.
And the consistent piece.
It's consistent.
Not just it was used once and has been rebrought back.
Exactly, yeah, because there's been resurrected straplines. Now, and one of them I'll contest a little bit. But anyway, number 5 that I could find, 5th longest running, 1975, BMW.
Yeah.
The ultimate driving machine. That 1975, so that's almost 50 years old. Now, that's quite surprising. I mean, it's been around, I think, as long as I've been sort of driving cars. But I didn't realize it goes back to the 70s. That's quite interesting. Number 4, very popular one, 1971, L'Oreal, Because You're Worth It.
Yeah.
Again, that's
a stayer.
That's a stayer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, classic number 3 is probably the one that if you said, pick one you think's been around a long time, this is what I'd have guessed. Avis, We Try Harder.
Yeah.
That's 1962.
Yeah.
And still been going. Now, number 2 surprised me because it's older than I thought, and I'm not sure how consistent it's been, but 1957, Have a Break, Have a Kit Kat.
I'm sure the guys at Nestle will correct you if
They
that's
will.
not true,
They will be quick to correct. But it was definitely. I definitely remember in the 80s. I felt like it went away and came back. But I
kind of think so as well. But I'm sure
it feels like it has been messed around with.
Someone will write in and tell you, no. It's been
Exactly.
We'll get the full story.
We'll get the full story. But number 1, and again, as soon as I heard this, I went, of course, a diamond is forever.
Yeah.
1947.
But I didn't know which brand to attribute that to. So it's interesting. So it's hit the vernacular, but I don't know how
you don't
well
naturally
branded.
think De Beers
Do you think De Beers? That's a good question.
No,
Association.
I don't.
Well, this is also the ultimate driving machine, actually, because you could misattribute that to someone else.
Yeah.
But you should have gone to Specsavers. It's impossible
Absolutely.
not to confuse it with anything else,
joy.
but I think it's a good trick. I want to talk about the serious case of humour. Now, again, I don't know whether I've got this quite right, but I jumped on the System One database before preparing for this, just to see, your top scoring campaigns of all time. Number 1 with 5.5 star, which puts it right in the top echelons of anything we've ever tested, was the Tower Block ad. Just for people listening and watching, just describe this ad. It's a very simple ad, but it's very funny. But just describe the ad for people.
So we've got a charming and likeable delivery guy, gets his big heavy package out of his van and gets to the bottom of the tower block, and wouldn't you know, the lift's broken. So up he starts walking, a little bit of interaction on the stairwell, that just makes you chuckle. Gets to the door, knocks on the door, delivery for your love.
This says block 2. It's over there, mate.
And she points over there, and he's in the wrong tower block.
Absolutely brilliant.
Was that
Such a
was
simple
that an
idea.
all right?
That was good.
That was
I was
good.
feeling it. I was with you.
Yeah.
I was thinking, yeah.
You should work in advertising.
But what I love about now, I'd need to go and check on the System One database just to check on this. But when I looked at the report on that, the over 50% of the emotion recorded on that was humour. Was amusement, which is how we capture. And there are 15 different types of happiness that we measure in the report. And in key associations, where we ask people spontaneously tell us what you associate with the ad, half of it was funny, half of it was opticians and Specsavers, right? So you made people laugh. And they remembered
us.
Yeah.
You made sure they knew who you were, which is pretty cool. But humour seems to have kind of gone off the agenda a little bit, doesn't it? But
Well, to the point where there's a special category at Cannes for it now.
I know.
But it's really powerful, right? So, if you're going to interrupt somebody's viewing with a commercial message, I think you have a job to do to reward them in some way, to entertain them in some way. Humour does that really, really well.
It does. I mean, what the data also suggests as well is that we measured the strength of emotion as well in this, and it got very, very, very high. So not only were people feeling happy, that was the overriding emotion. When you drill into happiness, it's amusement, but also when we asked them to rate it on a scale, it came very high as well. And what's lovely about it is fluency, of course, and 99% of people that after watching the ad said it was a Specsavers ad. So you kind of put the two things together, which is amazing.
And we've run that ad in other countries as well without changing the language. So
without changing the
language, we did it with subtitles. So
In Norway,
yeah. So
That's
and it
interesting.
scored. I think it was voted the best international ad of all time, or since 2006 when they recorded these things, and it worked just as well.
Well, there you go. I mean, so everyone can relate to climbing up a tower block for a delivery.
Even though it's
in
a
the wrong
different
place.
looking tower block and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. But still.
It was very
still
London
landed.
looking.
It's interesting because we made that ad it's the first should have ad we made coming out of COVID, and we had a conversation around what world do we want to be in, and we wanted a nod to the
What everyone had
frontline
been through.
heroes actually of the COVID world, but we were never going to make an ad about COVID, but just nodding to everyone's reality, and it felt really real. I love one of the stories about that ad as well. There's a group of teenage girls stood on the stairwells, and one of the teenage girls in that scene lives in that tower block, and she came up to us the day before and was like, "What are you doing?" "We're making an ad. Can I be in it?" And we were like, yeah, democratic Specsavers. Why not join us? And the reason she's wearing a towel, by the way, in that final scene is because she fell over the day before and cut her head.
Oh,
but there's something about the authenticity about opening the door with a towel on her head that sort of works.
Yeah.
You'd never have.
You know
never
what it's like?
scripted that.
You can't look at the ads without remembering the slight traumas.
I love
The
the
process of
I love the
making it.
casting. Just like, who's available tomorrow?
Yeah.
Who wants to be in an ad?
Yeah.
That's brilliant,
It's
isn't it? Absolutely wonderful. Number 2, actually, on the database was Vet. So just
classic.
tell us about Vet.
So we have a scene in a vet. There's a cat being looked at by the vet. There's a bit of nervousness because the vet can't find the pulse to this cat. So you can see him, the drama's building in the ad. You can see him getting more and more nervous about the fact that there's no pulse. So he sort of pulls the emergency red cord and goes, "Quick, we need whatever the CPR team is for the cat." And the veterinary nurse just walks in and takes the cat off the table. And we realise it's not a cat, it's her furry hat. It should have gone to Specsavers. Again, really simple.
Very simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, with a beautiful twist at the end. And you can see that in the response. You see the suspense, then you see the peak in emotion at the end.
Yeah.
And of course, peak end roll, as we often talk about System 1, is, leave people feeling great at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. Good use of humour. Now, also, what I think is so wonderful as well about the idea is because it can live way beyond. You don't need a 30-second TV spot, do you? So, what have been some of the most successful other channels where the ideas turned up in?
We do really well on out of home because it's just a simple idea. And great out of home needs to be really simple. So the ladder executions where we ostensibly painted over the ladder, I think they scored really well on System 1, if I'm not wrong.
3.9 star, which for out of home is very good. So I think out of home average is about 2.1 stars.
Yeah.
So it's a bit harder with out of home because to create emotion is a bit more tricky because you've got less to work with. What I love about what you've done, though, is you've got this big idea, people get it, and all the emotion you created around the idea through TV, for example, gets translated into that out of home. So to get almost a 4-star is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That's very good.
We've just bought the huge out of home space in Waterloo. So that's live. It certainly was last week. I don't know if it still is, but you can go and have a look. Where we are counting the amount of people that are mistaking this for a departures board. So literally it just goes 396 people mistaking this for a departures board. Should have gone to Specsavers.
Is that the
huge one?
one
So imagine
above
rush hour when the trains are cancelled, which is every second day, around between platforms 1 and 12. Literally, there's your audience for that. So we just have fun with it. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
But the other nice thing, it does allow others to have fun as well. So our colleagues down in Australia, they actually made it a competition for young budding film writers and so on. And so they've just made a small should have ad. I mean, the formula is quite straightforward in a way. It's quite hard to actually execute. And you can have fun like this. People will write in with their scripts. People will video their friends doing stuff. It just lives in that way.
Have you ever made an ad that someone sent in and said, "I've got an idea"? Has that ever happened? Because it feels like that could be.
We've had competitions, so we have, we followed through on it.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things we've found is actually it's harder than you think. And so the only teams who've successfully written should have ads have been the ones based here, which is interesting as well. So there's something about understanding the nature of the business, really getting it. It's not just comedy, but there's something. It's how it connects to us as a business. Don't know why quite it should be the case, but. There's been none that have been written other than by teams based on the island.
What about within social media? Does that because because obviously you've got your own team in house as well, haven't you? So you can react to things around you. So what have been some of the examples of how social media have embraced the idea?
I mean, sport's a great platform for social media, isn't it? Everything we do around referees and footballs, and the minute there's a mistake on a pitch, where should have gone to Specsavers about it. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. Am I right in saying, because someone commented on LinkedIn to say that you sponsor referees?
So it was something we did a few years ago, which I thought was, at the time, just brilliant because it shows the idea just spreads. I think we still do for the Scottish referees. So it sort of just continues in the background there. But it's like there's so many different ways in which you can execute a creative idea. It doesn't have to be through a 30-second TV slot.
Yeah. Now, I'd love to talk about how you go about it, because obviously one of the things that makes you different is you do all your creative in-house, don't you?
Yeah.
It all happens here in Guernsey.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So talk to me about why that is. Why is it that Specsavers decided to in-house the kind of creative department, which most companies of this size would probably bring an agency in?
I don't think there was ever a strategy that said, let's be trailblazers in in-housing.
I don't think they even realised that's what they were doing.
No.
Yeah.
I think back in the days, it's like, we need to produce a leaflet. Let's hire somebody who can make leaflets for us. And then it kind of grew from that. So there's no real logic behind it. It just became.
Weirdly, I get that because I've worked in big companies and small. In big companies, it's just normally outsourcing. So in small companies, you don't have those budgets or that complexity. You go, I need a graphic designer. Let's hire a graphic designer. I remember I was did private equity for a few years in a little juice business, and I was the Twitter handle. I did design the logo above the door. I did the uniforms for the people, the team on the factory. It's like it just builds.
Entrepreneurial
You almost
businesses.
don't even think. It's just
and you get to a certain point and you realise, this is what we've got, and kind of works.
And then I think you get to that point and you realise there's a huge benefit in the brand being owned and creatively and strategically developed from people who live and breathe it daily. And I think that's what we see as a business.
Now, you came from London, like epicenter of the world in terms of creativity, big global holding companies sort of thing, and you're now on an island, with a team in a population of 60,000. How would you get the talent? I mean, I was kind of trying to figure out how on earth you kind of hire the talent. Do you bring them in, or are they locally grown? Or
both, actually. I think there's 3 buckets to our talent. So locally grown is really important to us. So we've got some incredible success stories of people who've joined straight from school here, not even uni, straight from school into the door and literally learned on the job. And there's some brilliant work being written by those guys. So that's really important to us. We're doing some work with the School of Communication Arts to make sure that we're getting that good pipeline from the local schools and colleges, which you've been working on.
Yeah. So we've basically worked with every school on the island. We've got all their A-level students, or at least we've made the offer to their A-level students. They're coming here for boot camps, for workshops. And it's kind of like, it'll help them with their A-level studies. It also helps us because we're improving the skill base from which we can recruit in a couple of years' time. And it's kind of like, we've got about 80 at the moment, and 20 will go through to summer school, and a couple of those hopefully will come in and do apprenticeships with us. And again, yes, because you have to think creatively. If you were a small town in the middle of the UK somewhere, you might just be able to get people to sort of commute in or drive to you. We don't have that flexibility. So you've got to be thinking differently about it, which then ends up, I find myself in meeting with government officials, heads of schools, all this sort of stuff, which is like, that's not my job description, but it's part of the job of, how do I ensure there's a pipeline of talent coming in and through the business? And then we nurture them and grow them. And some of them have done amazing things. And then invariably, some of them then want to say, can I get experiences elsewhere? Which is absolutely, and then they'll come back afterwards.
It's back to that long game, isn't it? It's thinking about your talent in the way we think about the business. It is important for us, though, to go out and find expertise that have got experience from other agencies and other models of working. And that's when we turn into the Guernsey Tourist Board, isn't it, Peter? But we've made some brilliant hires from top agencies. And I think the thing they've all got in common, if I think about the casting, is I love what I do. I love advertising. I might be a little bit over traditional ad land. I'd like to experience something different, but I love the craft of what I do. But casting for that is interesting because you've met Mary. Mary doesn't have an ego. She's very down to earth. So there's no room for anyone else to have egos and not be down to earth in this business. So we go after the right sort of people from Adland and we bring them over, and we've got some brilliant examples of guys that are,
It shows the importance of culture.
Yeah.
Because that, you recruit the people. If you aren't the right sort of person, you don't survive in the culture. It doesn't work for you. You end up going back or something. You do something else. But if you select people and choose them based on that culture, they will thrive and develop, do some really amazing work. And nearly all of them just love that. I wouldn't say freedom, but it's like, I suddenly don't have all of that sort of rubbish that used to go on. And I realise now it was rubbish. I can now just focus on
doing the right thing,
doing really good work, doing work that lasts long term with a client, if you want to call it that, who's prepared to invest in this stuff.
Yeah. Now, one of the interesting things about in-housing, of course, is you're both the client and the agency in effect, aren't you? So you're within the business sort of thing. So how has that changed you, particularly in terms of because I guess you've come from agencies where you're pitching ideas all the time, you're selling ideas in. Well, now you're in the business, aren't you, as effectively the client and the agency. So how does that dynamic work?
It's really interesting. It's been, I mean, God, I could bore you. I've got so many observations about the shifts that we've all had to make. And I say to people who are joining us from external agencies, you're going to have to unlearn some of the stuff that you've spent decades learning. There's a lot of similarities. So we talk about we've taken the best of Adlan, but we've left the rest. So there are similarities. We want to be really clear in our accountability. So the marketing team are still accountable for writing the briefs because we can't mark our own homework. I think that's really important. But the walls are down, because our planning team can partner those marketeers, especially if the brief's a bit tricky, and make sure the brief is written brilliantly. Because no one's looking at P&L. Peter, thankfully, doesn't want me to make any money. Just wants me to do the right thing for the business. And it is freedom. It's liberating.
I think one of the practical, if you think practical things here, is often clients aren't really good at writing briefs. Right, so anyone in Adland here was going to be nodding at this point,
yes.
kind of going, "Oh yeah."
I'm trying not to nod, so I don't offend it.
Half the audience is cheering at this point. Yeah.
No, but I mean, it's true, right? And the art of writing a brief is really, really hard. And good agencies do tend to partner with their clients and sort of like help people through it, particularly young brand managers or young marketeers through the process to help upskill them. Here, they can just walk across from one side to the other, and they can literally work on something side by side. And then you just raise the bar, because writing a decent brief requires you as a marketeer to be really clear on what you're trying to achieve.
I think the other thing as well is insight, isn't it? Because I remember I was at Luxo Robin and Suntory. We had an in-house. We had a hybrid model. So I was working with Gray and JWT as kind of strategically, I suppose you'd say. But then I had an in-house team that typically did sort of social media production, but occasionally would pitch some big above the line ideas. But what was really interesting about it was that because they had the insight in the brand and they knew what was going on, they would just pitch an idea because it came to them because they understood the business, and sometimes their ideas were as good as on what occasions better. Actually,
absolutely. And we find that there was a wonderful piece of work we did last year, which was the I Don't Go spot for our domiciliary business. And actually, I remember that being shared with me, and that was pre anyone briefing it, pre anyone really thinking about it. We knew we had that when we were ready to go with a communication platform for our dummy business. So it's just more iterative.
Tell me a bit more about it, 'cause I did enjoy that because I didn't go to Specsavers.
Yeah.
It was really surprising and like, oh, hang on a second, they've dropped the line. What's happened?
We can play with it.
Realise,
I'm really proud of that piece of work, and the reason I am is that subject matter you could treat really emotionally. Okay, so maybe that was the opportunity for us to drop our humour. But actually, our customers in the domiciliary space are fascinating people. They've all got lives. We want to make them the hero of that work, and they're the hero of that story. But our dummy partners out on the road were sending me clips when that launched of it being reenacted. So they'd turn up at someone's house, disabled for whatever reason, they can't leave the house, open the door. I don't go to Specsavers, they come to me. And I had so much footage. That's when you've cut through, when literally your customer base in that space are reenacting your ad.
Yeah. That is amazing. That's amazing. And also, you've changed the name of how you refer to yourselves. I mean, we talk about agency and in-house. I think they're sort of, I guess, the labels we put on it. But that's not how you call yourselves in terms.
No, I think that's quite loaded language and comes with a set of behaviours that we don't really want to encourage. So we've branded to Specsavers Creative. We're just another department of experts. And that gets rid of any connotations of supplier, of I'm going to set my expectations and you will do what I ask. And I'm not saying that's every client agency relationship, but there's legacies of that, as we know, in the world. So we just want to rid ourselves of that. And we're a team of experts. That's okay.
So if anyone's listening and they're thinking about kind of creating an in-house team, what would your advice be to kind of getting this right?
I would say don't do it for financial reasons. There will be financial benefits, but don't make that the reason you're doing it. You have to really think about what your reason is and think about realistically what talent you're going to be able to attract, because we could not do this without the right people. So
and we have been investing for decades in building it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't happen overnight.
And we now get those great hires from London Adland because we're famous for our creative work.
You are,
so it's not a difficult sell.
Yeah.
But you really have to consider just how compelling the proposition is going to be to the people.
And one of the questions I'm curious about is kind of where out and when you decide to change things. Because I think one of the things that might be broken about the process is because we work on annual planning cycles. And I remember having I won't name them, but conversation with a big agency I partnered with. They'd almost sit me down every year and go, "So what have you budgeted for us for next year?"
Because we need a new one because they wear out.
I know. And then we had this weird conversation where I was like, I was working on Luke. We made this amazing ad, this absolutely brilliant ad with Anthony Joshua on Lucas Age Sport. It's just brilliant, right? And it was 5 stars and it was amazing. And the team had absolutely nailed it. And I had this weird conversation where they were like going, "We're slightly worried about it." I'm like, "Why are you worried about it?" "Well, we're worried that you're going to run it next year." I'm like, and that's a problem because, well, you won't be briefing us with a new campaign. And I could see the slight, the conflict.
The nervousness. Well, the business model relies on it.
I know, but this is a conversation I got into because I said, well, actually, if this is as successful as it should be with a 5-star, right, we will grow our revenue. I'll be coming back for more, right? Or I'll be coming back for an evolution of it. Actually, I'll give you a brief on a different brand, this sort of thing. But I think we're in this kind of particular, with agency, in this kind of like game of every year changing it. Yeah. And the new brand manager comes in, the new brand manager wants to earn their spurs and, change it again sort of thing. I guess you're released from that pressure, are you?
I think it's one of the things I think is really, we're still working on it, if I'm absolutely honest, because I think as a young marketeer, you almost define yourself based on what you've created, what you've done, so that you can say on your CV or, in your review, you can say, "I made that happen, I did that," whatever. And I think I'm trying to shift that sort of conversation so that it becomes, what did you achieve? What was your outcome? Because if you focus on that, you worry less about the inputs and the stuff that gets there. I mean, I've worked in my previous business, and I would review all the sort of the marketing plans in each country, and you'd go around and say, "All right," and they'd proudly show you, "This is what we did, and isn't it great?" And it, got this level of reaction on Twitter or whatever the random metric they had. To which you go, "Well, that's great, but what was it there to do? Is that its objective?" And they'd look at you sort of blankly at that question of objective. And they go, "Well, what were you trying to achieve with it?" And then that's like deflates the whole thing. And I think for me, if the marketeers focus on that, so they focus, what is it the outcome I'm trying to achieve? Then if I look at how can I do that, if I can reuse the same ad, then happy days, because that means I've got more money to spend on the media, which means more people get to see that great ad. It's really as simple as that. That's what I want people to get to thinking.
And one of the things about being in-house, I suppose we're empowered to ask why. Why are you briefing us on this? Is it the right thing to do? Why wouldn't we just use? Because we're not a profit-making machine. It's not our agenda to make work for the sake of making it.
And you've got such good work in your locker as well. So the bar is quite high, isn't it? In terms of,
well, we've had a few this year where some of the teams have said, "All right, getting ready for the next brief." And you're looking at it and kind of go, "Why do you need to do that?" And they show me in your strategy what's going on here. What's your objective? What are you trying to achieve? And I kind of go, "So you don't actually need this, do you?" "Right. Well, these guys are really busy right now, and you don't need it, so we'll stop it, shall we?" And
also, I mean, in addition to that, I think there's also the fact that what we know from the system on database is that most advertising wears in.
Yeah.
It gets
not
better. Because people assume, don't they, like, "Oh, you're telling a joke." And therefore, once you've told the joke.
Once you've heard the joke, that's it.
It's gone, right? But that's not true. People love, it's only fools and horses, a bit where Del Boy falls over at the bar. We still laugh even if we've seen something 20 times. Weirdly, it's that thing of it almost gets better the more you play it.
And the evidence is it's not just on humour as well. I think most ads sort of benefit from, good ads anyway, from being seen a few times.
Yeah.
I remember doing work with you guys years and years ago, and I showed a direct correlation. And it's like the second time it aired, it got a higher score. Then when it aired again, it got another higher score, and you go, "This is really interesting." That challenges our agency model a little bit because I don't need another one.
Yeah.
And Cat, which everyone loves, that ran for 9 years. So if you can run something that successfully for 9 years, it's like, Right, okay, there's a learning there, I think.
Absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. By the way, just pick on the phrase you used earlier, which I thought was really powerful, is why are we doing this? Because I know for me, whenever I've been client-side CMO, all the teams present back their plans. It's like, well, this is the social media plan for next year. We're going to add 10%, and this is the out-of-home bit, and this is the in-store budget. And everyone seems to like just
get a consistency of language, so we're all talking about the same thing. But it's also partially to get people thinking about sort of an outcome-based approach to why am I doing this? And if the answer is, if you're not clear from a business perspective why you're doing it, you probably don't need to be doing it. And then you can spend your time and energy on something else.
Such good advice. But people are afraid, aren't they? They're afraid of, if I don't do this, am I out of a job? And I had this with a previous insight team, and they'd done so much insight that they had a new project, which was to create a library of insight with a searching function where he gets the insight. And I said, but no one's using it. So I'd love it if they were actually using it. And it's like, even to create a library of it just blew my mind. And I just said to them, I said, look, honestly, my biggest advice to you is, ask ask senior leaders in the business what the biggest single issue keeping them awake at night is, and use your clever insight brains to answer that question, right? And you'll be loved forever.
Yeah,
but just anchor yourself to what we're trying to do.
When I ran insight teams, the brief to them is always answer the question before it's asked. So you've got to understand the business well enough, right, and anticipate someone's going to be asking me about this. And insight takes a while to develop. You don't want to be, as soon as they ask a question, then say, I'll be back to you in 3 months' time. 3 months earlier, you need to be anticipating. So you've got to be connected into the business. And I think that's probably the same for a lot of the creative is because they're connected to, the team are connected to what's going on. They can see what's coming and they can start to have the thinking. And Donny was probably an outcome of that. It's like, it wasn't a formal brief. They just knew we're growing our domiciliary business. At some point, we're going to be asked to communicate this. They'll be asking us whether we can do it in a should have. Let me think about that. Without the pressure of a brief and a deadline and stuff, you just quietly get on with it.
I love that. There's something in that. What question am I going to get asked next?
Yeah.
It's a really, really, I haven't thought about that before. That's a really good question to ask. And can you anticipate? Because you probably can. I mean, if you spent a few minutes thinking about, what's happening in the economy, where's it going?
If you understand your business, you should be able to work out what's coming next. And, so.
Also, our team are really well exposed to the wider business, aren't they? So they all sit on leadership team events that are all functions. So again, different from an external agency, their exposure to what's really going on under the bonnet is huge, and there's a massive value to that.
That's huge. I imagine, I might be wrong, but I imagine that your team are probably bubbling with a few ideas. They're waiting for the question to get asked. Right? The moment this question gets asked, right? By the way,
like that to be the case. Yes. Here's what I made earlier. Here's in the lower drawer. I'm just going to reach out and pull this one. I think this is what you're looking for here.
Exactly.
But I think that's the way it works, right? You're anticipating the way the business is moving. You should have an understanding, and this is the real advantage of being in-house. You're having lunch with the guys, so you know what they're talking about. And that allows you to be ahead of the game.
It's back to that, what's keeping them awake at night. We all sort of know that because we live alongside them. That's far easier. You don't need an insight team to understand that.
I've sort of done a sales role for the last 4 years, and I like to talk to my team about understand the problem you're solving and make the solution easy. Right. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, it's like, if you can understand your customer's problem, solve it easy for them, they'll love you. It's like, it can be as simple as that
not
sometimes.
Rocket science.
Indeed. I'd love to talk about culture if I can, because I know you've won Best Place to Work in lots of different countries and markets. And you've hinted a lot about the culture and what it's like working here. So what defines the culture and what makes it a great culture?
Yeah. Well, so, culture is generally just the accepted norms, behaviours, ways of working, all that sort of stuff. So that's your definition of culture. When you look into what drives it, I think it is the family. So Doug and Mary have a strong influence over it. I think you're in a purpose-led business, so it's like, I know I'm doing something meaningful, and that makes an effect. I think we're quite empowered. And one of the things I've tried to sort of really emphasize is to give people the freedom to be successful. So you'll get some CEOs, I'm sure, who are, for whatever reasons, more controlling, and maybe sometimes you need to be as well. But if you waited for what I could come up with, it would be pretty limited and pretty pathetic. Whereas if I can empower 100 people to be thinking about ideas and working on stuff, it's going to be 100 times better. So a lot of the culture is, we talk about it's quite entrepreneurial. So I don't know if you're familiar that we're a partnership, which means that each opticians, each store is owned and run by the people who work there. It's their business. And they pay a fee to us for services and all that sort of stuff, right? So it's a genuine partnership. And we do that because it encourages them to be entrepreneurial about their business. How are they going to grow their business locally on the high street of town X? And that runs through the whole business. So it's not just the partners, but each of us that are then encouraged to be that entrepreneurial, to be thinking ahead. Now, you get to a size where middle management, bureaucracy, all that sort of stuff starts creeping in. And so a lot of the things we've been doing recently are trying to define, well, what is the culture that we want? And how do we get back to that? And strip away any sort of temptation of bureaucracy to creep in. I think it's really, really vital.
I love it. Personally, I actually love that delegation to the front line, because the people that are closest to the customer usually know, and they also take ownership, of course, because you feel like it's yours rather than waiting from someone on a high to tell you what to do. The flip side is, of course, what happens when things go wrong, right? Because when you've done that, presumably not everything goes perfectly. So what do you do when? Yeah, what happens when a campaign goes out the window and you're like, I wouldn't have done it.
With freedom
like that.
Comes responsibility,
yes,
doesn't
exactly,
it?
Yeah.
No, and I think that's important, isn't it? You've got to feel as though you own it. Otherwise, you never. If you feel as though you can hide behind, well, it wasn't my decision, somebody else made it for me, you have no ownership for the problem. So it actually works better if you are an entrepreneur and you know you were given freedom to do that. You kind of then own the fixing of that.
Yeah. I do think you've built a culture of psychological safety, though. So I think we all feel like if it goes wrong, you're not going to haul us over the coals too badly.
No, it's just like,
that's key, though. That is key.
Well, so there's a lot of talk around the importance of psychological safety in business, and I genuinely believe that's, if you're going to get the best out of people, you have to give them that sort of safety net. So if something goes wrong, so we were talking earlier around social media, right, which is a really good example. And I know in LinkedIn, some of the people say, "Oh, how do they do that?" Because it's really reactive. They go, honestly, I have no idea what they're doing. They have the freedom to act, but if it goes wrong, they also have responsibility for fixing that. And I probably only needed to sort of comment twice, maybe 3 times when I've seen something. I go, think that probably went a wee bit too far. And everyone goes, yeah, no, you're probably right, fine. And that's it. It's a gentle nudge. And if you can get by with that generally does enough, because the upside is worth far more than the potential risk, right? If the upside is people are really giving it their all and they'll come up with things you couldn't even have asked them to do, that is, pure genius in my mind.
Yeah, it comes back to talent, of course, doesn't it? And having the right talent, the sort of people that want to own things, want to come up with ideas, you know, feel it's on them.
And interestingly, not everybody wants to accept that responsibility when it's actually thrust upon them. And that's really
it's been a big learning for me, actually, because I hear you talk. I get really excited listening to you talk. Going, yeah, this is me. I put my hand up, and then I get really shocked when I do that, and no one else is like, "Oh, okay." So you want to be told,
and some people do, and you go, "Yeah, that's fine." You know, it's like at least if you know that's the case,
okay.
and in which case, then don't complain when you are told.
Yeah.
But I think probably through recruitment and natural selection and stuff like that, we've got a lot of people here who are prepared and happy to accept that responsibility, and in exchange for the freedom that they get. And I think certainly in your team, I've done the best to sort of ensure that's the case. And I think probably if I use Dommy as a really good example, right? So you know where I'm going on this. But so I don't go to Specsavers. Potentially a controversial line. When we shared it with Doug, the chairman and co-founder, and he went apoplectic. I mean, I've never seen actually anybody quivering with rage before. It's an expression I've heard of. I've never actually seen it before, but that was his reaction at the time. Him and Mary were in my office and they were just winding themselves up. At which point you kind of go, okay. That's like, might have stepped over a line here, still relatively new in the business. But what was important was the team felt completely safe, I think, and supported. And you go, all right, well, look, they've got a point of view. It's their business at the end of the day. Let's understand that. And then over time, and they are very, very good as well, we were able to work through, right, these are the issues. We sort of hopefully reassured them on all the different pieces. I think we ended up doing a small test.
We did. We tested it regionally.
Just to sort of reassure them. And then, of course, when it came through, and it's been one of the best that we've created in terms of moving the brand metrics and all of the brand metrics, now they're kind of like, okay, we get it. And now, because it worked and they trusted the process, they have more faith and trust in the people. But I think that for the guys involved, I mean, that must have been quite a scary thing. Can you imagine the owner of the business says he hates it, and they kind of go, "Oh, I'm just a little creative. What if?" But to create that safety, Doug and Mary have done that, and that really means that you can push the boundaries and go to places that you might not otherwise do.
I really get that. It's one of those ones, isn't it, where like in a way you're so close to it, and obviously they are. I mean, there's no two people more invested in the idea, right? And you're going to them going, "Oh, we're going to tell our consumers, don't bother." You know what I mean? I get that, right? But then actually, it's one of those things that we all know the joke, and we all know the premise so well that actually, if you heard that, I mean, I heard that, I thought, "Oh, I think I know where this is going," sort of thing. It's just, and you got permission, haven't you, to be that brave because of what you built over so much time. I think if you were a new brand that just came out with it, you'd feel like, that's a bit odd. But the fact that you've built this idea, it allows you to play with it, doesn't it?
Exactly. It just gives you more bandwidth, doesn't it?
Really good. Let's talk quickly about the future then. So you've gone into audiology. So I was fascinated by that, because obviously it makes sense in terms of fixing eyes, fixing hearing, of course. But you've built such a clear business around glasses and vision, and even the idea is about seeing better. So how do you make the pivot then into something
so I think we've been in
analogous?
We've been in audiology about 10-ish years, something like that. Someone's going to correct me, but so it's sort of one of those things. How do you expand where you are? And that goes a little bit to what business do we think we're in as well. So we've looked at it from a number of different dimensions. At one point, we felt that we were in the business of running successful partnerships. So therefore, if that's our strength, you could go into, I don't know, dentistry or pet care or, something like that. But I think we came back to Doug and Mary are trained optometrists. It's going to be in the healthcare area. So whatever we end up doing, it's going to be stretching from a core area into other connected parts of healthcare. So audiology is kind of quite a natural. And that business is just ramping up and growing like really, really fast at the moment. And so you kind of go, well, connected to that will be other probably healthcare areas. So whether it's myopia management or we do actually have 20 hospitals, eye hospitals, under a different brand. So we do 250,000, I think it is, cataract operations a year. So you can stretch the business into other areas, but they're all connected broadly to that healthcare dimension.
Is the audiology business branded Specsavers? So the brand is stretched, even though it's called Specsavers.
Yeah, you would think you'd have to change your name to Ear Savers or something.
I was going to ask.
But no, it's managed to stretch in that area, and actually quite a few other businesses have sort of bring the two together.
It's a bit like your question with the advert, isn't it? We'd probably take away literally being in the business, right? But out there, I'll go Specsavers for my hearing.
Yeah.
People are not as literal as we kind of like.
We overthink.
We create these rules, don't we, about what you can and can't do with your brand, and really should let the consumer decide.
I think it's and it's proven to be highly successful. So you then know, well, that gives us lots of growth potential for the next few years, and then we'll expand into connected areas. Yeah. After that,
it's given us some lovely creative opportunities as well, the audiology business, because it's telling a different story. So, the critical thing is our team aren't just briefed on should've. There's so much more than the sight gag to this business. So they're some of the best briefs we get when we're telling the lesser known stories about this brand, and it's generating brilliant creative work.
Well, that brings me back actually to our System 1 scores, because TV, obviously audiovisual gives you the biggest canvas on which to paint, as it were. Out of home, a bit more challenging, but 3.9 stars, pretty exceptional. But 3.3 star for your audiology radio ad, and there, of course, you're restricted to just what you can hear, which is pretty amazing. So that's one of the best audio ads we've ever tested.
Oh wow! Good.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah, 3.3 star, and I think 99% awareness as well, and fluency as well. So again, shows you can move into audiology and into audio and still get brand off the back of it. So very impressive.
We've got a good legacy of some stonking radio. The team I think it's their strongest channel aside from out of home.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, it's working hard. So maybe last question to finish up with, how is technology going to change the future of your business? So like, can I get an eye test on my phone, or can I use augmented reality to put glasses on, or whatever, so what can we expect to see next?
I mean, a lot of it's already here, or it's in very early stages. So technology's moved to the point where you can nearly do most parts of an eye test online. So you can do a refraction, you can do the measurements, you can try things on. And we've been testing all of these different components out. It's a bit clunky, it's not quite there yet, but you just know within a few years that'll happen. Now, there are regulatory issues as well. So it's not as simple as that, because a sight test has to be signed off by an optometrist. They have to see you. So there are things to overcome, but let's imagine over the next few years, those rules will either be relaxed or they'll be adjusted or changed in some way. Then you go, right, well, there's clearly going to be an interesting new area to get into. So I think we have a team of people looking at the future, looking at sort of innovative areas to get involved with. And we're just testing and learning. And as you do with anything, some of the stuff will work, some of the stuff won't. We actually spun up a small operation in Belgium, so it was out of the way and nobody would know we were doing it, just to try some of these things out. We've closed it down now, but it was just let's see what happens when you try and do some of these things. We've recently bought a small online business in the States, and that's really just to help us understand how do we retail more online than we do at the moment, because we're very store-based for obvious reasons. There'll be some things like ear care, wax removal is going to be tricky. Unless you come into a store.
I wasn't expecting to get to wax removal.
No, wax removal's huge for us. Yeah.
It's a real growth opportunity.
Wow.
It's surprising. But anyway, so you can look at some stuff like that.
In your master plan, wax removal.
You do become desensitized to talking about wax removal and looking at wax removal quite quickly.
Wow.
Yeah. So no, from my perspective, there's a lot of new potential, and it's like in any industry, right? There'll be forces of change going on that are going to disrupt you. And you can do one of two things. You can either try and pretend it doesn't exist, or you can embrace it and learn from it and say, well, I wonder which of this will play out and which of this won't.
Yeah.
So you just take that approach.
Well, maybe to end on, Nicola, I want to ask you, you've been here 4 years, you're on the island. What stood out to you? What are you most proud of since you've been here? And what's your big...
I think what we've done really well as a team is we've balanced nurturing the legacy of the campaign and our team with breathing freshness into it. So we've done that with both our work and our talent, and it's paying off.
Now, that is really good advice, isn't it? In fact, so again, looking at lots of campaigns we look at, the ones that have the ability to evolve but stay true to the idea are the ones that just keep on getting better.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both. It's been amazing. Could talk for a long time, but thank you for giving up your time and to talk about it. And I know a lot of people are going to get a lot from this.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for coming to the island.
Yes, pleasure. Thank you for listening to The Uncensored CMO. I hope you enjoyed that. If you never want to miss an episode again, please do hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, click on subscribe there too. If you want to follow me, you can do. I'm over at John Evans on LinkedIn, or find me on Twitter as well, at Uncensored CMO. Thanks again for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.